Yes.
Good morning, everybody.
Sir, just a minute, sir. Just a minute.
Are you hearing me properly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just a minute, sir. 1 minute, sir.
Okay.
My deepest pranams to our Swamiji, Dr. Shimurti Sharanaru. And I would like to welcome our CEO, Sri A.G. Paramashivaya, and Secretary A.G. Paramashivaya, sir, and CEO, Doreswamy, sir. And a warm welcome to today's speaker, Dr. M. Lokesh. Dr. M. Lokesh, sir, served as a professor in Purna Pradya College, Udupi, and Government College, Baindur, Dakshina Kannada district, and FMKMC College, Madikeri. His total teaching experience is 35 years, and he successfully completed the research project on colonial education in Kurga, 1834 to 1947. It is sanctioned by the Indian Council of Historical Research, and he has recognized guide for PhD programs in Mangalore University and published more than 60 research articles on various historical issues. And he has written books also on history, that is Kurga Invented 19th Century European Writings on Kannada. And now he is working on the book that is Kodagu, a colonial history. This professor, Dr. Lokesh sir, handled also administrative posts also and got honored also. His administrative service as a registrar of Mangalore University and deputy registrar evaluation of Mangalore University, private secretary to the vice chancellor of Mangalore University, coordinator of MSW course in Mangalore University, coordinator of Kodava Samskruti Adhyayana Pita at Mangalore University, and got awards from many organizations, history, Congress. So with these words, I would like to welcome Dr. Lokesh sir. Just I introduced a person of history, Dr. Lokesh sir. After his valuable and wonderful talks on today's topic, we will come to know the great personality of Dr. M. Lokesh sir. And next, I would like to welcome our principal, Dr. K.C. Ramesh sir, who is being with us and who is supporting to organize such kind of academical activities. And at the same time, I would like to welcome all my colleagues, teaching staff and non-teaching staff of our college. And at the same time, all the respected teachers who has participated in this webinar from the various corners of the nation and from our home state also. Once again, a warm welcome to you on behalf of our institution. Thank you, sir. Thank you, one and all. Now I request Dr. M. Lokesh, sir, to carry the session. Sir, please, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Well, at the very outset, let me appreciate the efforts of SJMS Arts, Science and Commerce College, Chitradurga in organizing a national webinar on a very interesting topic, India Past to Future. And I also take this opportunity to thank Dr. R.V. Hegadal in the beginning itself for the organizer of this webinar, for giving me an opportunity to speak on a very interesting topic called the Partition Historiography, or the Evolving Historiography of India's Partition. And I hope that there are history students, history research scholars, history teachers, as well as teachers and research scholars from other streams also. So before going to take up the historiography as such, let me very briefly, for about 2 minutes or so, explain you the word historiography. As far as historiography is concerned, history students know that very well. Historiography is nothing but the history of historical writing. That's all. And as all of us know, the past events cannot be, written about by a historian unless he gets a lot of information on that in the form of source material. So historian approaches the past through the what's called resource materials or source materials, we can say. Whatever happens in the past, those events actually leave behind a lot of, traces, a lot of evidences, etc., etc. On the basis of that, a historian who lives in the present approach the past and then establishes contact with the past and writes a story on the basis of the source material. And before going to take up the material for analysis, a historian will go through some procedures called historical methodology, and he will find out whether the source material or the traces left behind the past are genuine, are authentic. And after establishing the authenticity and veracity of the facts and figures of the past are left behind the past, well, he actually tries to construct the history of the past, or he tries to reconstruct whatever has happened in the past. And when a historian actually construct the past, or when a historian tries to make sense of the past, well, he will be influenced by a number of factors. If historians may say that is very objective in approaching the subject, and historians may also say that he has written a very objective and authentic history. Whatever might be his profession, but one thing that we have to remember is that a historian cannot write an objective history, because he would not have seen what has happened in the past. Only through the facts and figures he actually write the history, and therefore subjective elements do enter into the writing of history. And this is one thing that we have to remember. And therefore what happens is that whenever a person writes about something, about a person, historical figure, about an event, historical event, about a policy, historical policy, well, that history or explanation given by the historian will be questioned by another historian. He may differ with the explanations given by the first historian, and he may write another history on the basis of the same material. And therefore what happens here is that though the past remains constant, well, the perceptions about the past or the opinion about the past keeps changing from historian to historian. And therefore we have more than one book and any particular historical subject or any personality that appears in history. And these histories are these stories written about the past collectively constitute historiography. So as far as partition historiography is concerned, well, we know that India was partitioned in 1947, and this partition of India has become a source material for a large number of historians to write about the partition. And they actually asked a large number of questions about partition. Why did partition take place? Whether partition was avoidable, whether partition was inevitable, who was responsible for the partition, what is the role of Gandhi, what is the role of Nehru, what is the role of Patel, what is the role of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, why did the Congress refuse to launch a movement to stop partition of India? Why did Mahatma Gandhi keep quiet when the partition decision was being taken by the British government after consulting the Congress leaders as well as Muslim League? And whether partition could have been made less painful, whether the exodus or the migration of the people on both sides could have been stopped. So all these things are being discussed by the historians. And as far as these questions are concerned, the opinions actually differ from historian to historian, scholar to scholar, and therefore we have a vast corpus of literature, history, historical writing on partition, and this is called historiography. So historiography actually tells us how a historian actually has written history over a period of time, and what kind of influence he was under when he actually wrote a particular story, the story of a particular event or history of a particular event, whether he was objective in writing that. So all these things. Therefore, when we deal with the partition historiography, well, actually we deal with the writings that has come out on partition since 1947 up to 2020, and it's a very, very vast topic. As we know, today partition problem is influencing even even literature also. So in literature also, a large number of works have come out, and these works actually deal with not only deal with the high politics or the decisions taken at the highest level in Delhi, but also about the experiences of the victims, the people who suffered because of the partition, and they were forced to migrate. So there was voluntary migration, there was forced migration, there was ethnic cleansing, there was bloodletting, and there was an enormous amount of hostility between various communities during the partition. So a large number of issues have been discussed by the historians, and when historians have written on that, well, their opinion have undergone changes. And Indian historians have taken a particular view. Historians from Pakistan have taken a particular view as far as the creation of Pakistan is concerned. And as far as Bangladesh is concerned, as all of us know, partition took place in the year 1947, but within a few years' time, well, Bangladesh was created, East Pakistan became Bangladesh, and the Bangladesh historians have written a different thing after 1971. So up to 1971, they were actually following the opinion of West Pakistan, but after 1971, it was a liberation for them, not only from the British, but also from West Pakistan. So this is the kind of literature we have on partition. Now, before going to take up the topic in a very detailed manner, I will just remember some of the speeches made by what's called our great leaders like Gandhi or Nehru or Lohia. Hello, am I? Yes, long years ago, we made a tryst with the destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but very rarely in history, when we step out from the old to the new, when an age ends, and when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance. So this is one of the statements that actually emerges in the year 1947 in August, when India got actually independent. So Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru says that long years ago we made a tryst with destiny. That means that in the year 1929, when the resolution of Purna Swaraj or complete independence was taken at Lahore or in the Lahore Congress, well, Nehru says that they made a tryst with the destiny. And after some years, that is to say in the year 1947, well, when India got independence, Nehru says that now we are redeeming the pledge that we made in 1929. And another famous quotation is from a famous person by name Faiz Ahmad Faiz. As all of you know, he was one of the greatest Urdu poets, that South Asia has produced. And in the year 1947, he writes a poem, Shubh-e Azadi, and this is not the dawn, he says. And here he says, ye dag dag ujala, ye dag dag ujala, ye sab gazida seher, wo intezar tha, ye wo seher nahi, ye wo seher nahi hai. This means this stained light, this night bitten dawn, this is not that long awaited daybreak. So Faiz says that, everybody was expecting a dawn which will be full of hope, which will be full of confidence, which will be full of banhomi between Hindus and Muslims. But when the dawn came, and with that dawn came, where violence, arson, looting, molestation, etc., etc., and it completely spoiled the spirit of freedom that we actually acquired. So this is another, statement that actually emerged about the partition of the country. And finally, you have to quote from Nehru again. As you know, in the year 1960, a person called Leonard Mosley, one of the English writers, met Nehru and asked him as to why did the Kangas party, Nehru and Patel and Mahatma Gandhi accept a partition. And Leonard Mosley, who actually is the author of the famous book, The Last Days of the Raj means empire, written in 1960-61, Nehru says, we were tired men. He says, we were tired men and we were getting on in years too. So we were getting aged also. Few of us could stand the prospect of going to prison again. Few of us, stood the prospect of, could stand the prospect of going to prison again. And if we had stood out for a united India, where as we wished it, prison obviously awaited us. Prison obviously awaited us. And the plan of partition offered a way out, and we took it. That means Nehru and other leaders here expressed an opinion that, they were actually tired of fighting against the British. And they saw violence taking place, both in Punjab and northwestern frontier provinces and Punjab, especially Punjab. And violence actually made them that, partition is inevitable and that they should accept it. This is one important thing. But Nehru also expressed an hope that one day Pakistan, would come back to India. So he thought that the partition would be temporary and that Pakistan was bound to come back to us, bound to come back to India, but that it did not happen. So when we see all these statements, we can definitely say that the leaders wanted to retain a united nation or a united country, or they wanted to keep India united, but unfortunately, because of the various factors, well, they had to, bow to the British will, who actually wanted to what's called divide India. So this is one of the things that we have to bear in mind. Now, in history, as we know, partitions, have taken place in a number of countries and during various periods. So therefore, some historians actually say, for example, Brendan O. Laurie says that the partition is very much inherent in history. It is not new to India, it is not new to Palestine, it is not new to Ireland or Korea or other countries. It is actually inherent. And as far as India is concerned, they say that partition was bound to take place because the imperial British, when they decided to quit, well, they decided to divide India. Though they wanted to keep it united, they decided to divide it because of the fact that, these two communities would not remain united, and whatever efforts they would make to keep them united would fail. So Brendan O'Leary says that India's partition is called partition. It is not a secessionism. Secessionism in the sense, a piece of land, a piece of territory, or a particular province in a nation, moving away from the nation and forming an independent country. But here, Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Muslim League, were not interested in creating an impression that they were actually seceding from India. they actually asked the British to divide India into two nations and give independence one day in advance to Pakistan, and next day for India, just to create an impression that two independent states actually emerged at the same time, and it was not secessionism. Therefore, some historians do not use the term secessionism for Pakistan's creation. They say that it was partition, because they say that partition is always effected by an external agency like UNO or an quitting or abdicating imperial power, etc., etc. And they give the example of Ireland, Hungary, or Kurdistan, India, Palestine, Cyprus, and all these countries were actually, partitioned and new nations were created. And they actually, even in the post-Cold War world also, we see partitions, but most of the cases were considered as a secessionism. For example, Soviet Union. All nations actually seceded from the USSR, and USSR collapsed. Czechoslovakia, for example, Slovakia and other Croatia, all these nations actually seceded and became independent nations. For example, Ethiopia and Eritrea became an independent nation. All this, so they are called what's called secessionism. So this is one thing that we have to bear in mind. Well, now, as far as partition is concerned, we know that we have a vast amount of literature or historiographical works on India, on Pakistan, on East Pakistan, etc., etc. And for many years, the focus was mainly on Punjab, and only recently, from 1990s onwards, focus, was shifted to Bangladesh or the East Pakistan region. And in the beginning, we find in the 1940s, we find a number of works being written by great scholars such as G.D. Khosla, and then David Page, and then Pendle Moon, R.J. Moore, and other people. And in the later stages, some people actually wrote on what's called East Pakistan. Today, I am not going to deal with almost every book. I will be speaking on the trends, some of the trends actually that are available in the partition historiography. And the main features of partition historiography is that in the beginning, almost up to 1980s, you can say that most of the scholars actually wrote on the leaders. So that is called the great men theory. Great men theory. So when you deal with partition historiography, there are two groups you find among the historians. One is called intentionalist group. Another one is a structuralist group. Well, I am not going to going deep into that. So intentionalist groups actually talk about the role of human agency and also the British, etc., etc. And structuralists actually speak about determinism and all. So let us not bother much about these theorization of partition historiography. But now, what is important for us to remember is that whether people actually participated in decision-making process, or whether the decision to partition India was taken at the highest level and the decision was imposed on the people of India. That is very, very important to remember. And therefore, people like Asim Roy, one of the very well-known scholars on partition historiography, Asim Roy says that it was, power politics purely in the beginning. It was high politics, which actually, took the decision here to divide India. High politics. When we talk of high politics, it means that in Delhi, people who mattered. That means the leaders of various political parties, whether it is Indian National Congress or Muslim League or Unionist Party or Praja Krishik Party or the Akalis. So all these leaders, deliberated with Mountbatten, and took a decision, and these decisions were actually implemented. That is the thing that we have to remember. And in the politics related to high politics, well, there are many historians who say that some people were, mainly responsible for the division of the country, because immediately after the partition, there was demonizing of some leaders. Some people actually, wrote ageology in the sense in praise of some leaders who actually played a major role in dividing the country and creating a new country. For example, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, became a hero in Pakistan. He was considered as Qaidi Hajam, that means the great leader. And many people, started eulogizing them. The person who was Qaid or a great leader became a demon as far as India is concerned, became an evil genius as far as India is concerned. So many people wrote on Muhammad Ali Jinnah, eulogized him. And as far as Indian historians are concerned, some of them, wrote very critically about Jinnah, and they said that he played a major role in cutting India into two pieces. Now, whether partition was inevitable, and why did Jinnah actually divide India? All these things actually are discussed in the historiography related to high politics. And what were the role that Mahatma Gandhi actually played? Here, some of the questions that you have to remember is that are whether partition was inevitable. That was one of the questions. Second thing is whether the British deliberately divided India. Whether Mountbatten was sent to India with the brief that he should bring about the division of the country, or whether he was, told by, Clement Attlee that he should try to retain India's unity. Whether British wanted to retain the unity of India in order to protect its economic and defense or strategic interests in South Asia and also in Central Asia. Whether British made a very sincere attempt to protect the unity of the country. That is also one of the major issues that is being discussed by the historians who focus on high politics. And at the same time, another question is, why did the Kangas party accept division? Whether Patel was responsible for that. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Patel was being called by Mountbatten as walnut because he was very hard to crack, and once he cracked, he's like the pulp, very soft, it seems. And whether Nehru wanted to divide the country just to become the Prime Minister of India, he was power hungry. Both of these people were power hungry, and therefore they divided the country. So this is another question, whether they were power hungry. Why did Mahatma Gandhi accept partition? He could have launched a movement. He launched a non-cooperation movement in 1920. He launched a civil disobedience movement in 1929-30, and he launched the what's called Quit India movement in 1942. And why didn't Mahatma Gandhi try to what's called stall the partition? Because he was the man who said, well, only on my dead body there could be partition of the country. Why didn't he try? So this is another major issue that everybody actually discussed. So when you look at the literature or the historiography that was written from 1947 up to 1980s, you find only this kind of what's called a trend, criticizing the leader of a particular party and eulogizing the leaders of some other party. So that means here what we see is that one binary aspect you can see, that is that Muslim League was for what's called partition, and Congress was for unity. So one party actually stood for unity and another party stood for partition. Whether this statement is correct. And one of the major issues that comes up here for discussion is to what extent what's called Jinnah was responsible. And very interesting thing that we come across is that in the 1980s, when Congress was approaching to celebrate its 100th anniversary of its birth, well, several books actually came out. R.J. Moore's book came out, and Stanley Wolpert's book, Jinnah and Pakistan, actually came out. And in the year 1985, another great book actually came out, that is called what's called the Sole Spokesman, Jinnah, Muslim League, and the demand of Pakistan. So this was written by a Pakistani American writer by name Ayesha Jalal, the Sole Spokesman, a very popular book. And it was followed by some other works like Origins of Partition by Anita Inder Singh, and later many other works also came out on these things. Here, what is interesting to note is that people like Stanley Wolport and Ayesha Jalal actually took, very contradictory stand here. Ayesha Jalal's book is a path-breaking book in the sense that though she is a Pakistan-born American writer, she said that Jinnah was not at all interested in the partition of the country. So it was a very shocking, discovery that she highlights. Whether Jinnah actually stood for the unity of the country, whether Jinnah was not interested in creating Pakistan. And as all of us know, in Pakistan, everybody actually eulogizes Jinnah. He was considered as the Qaid-e-Azam. He was a great leader. He was the person who actually played a stellar role in creating a new nation for Muslims. Now, if a historian says that Jinnah was not interested in creating Pakistan, he was not interested in partition of the country, it was a very shocking revelation, because most of the Muslim writers in Pakistan, felt that the creation of Pakistan was the realization of Muslim nationalism. It is Muslim communalism for Indians. It is Muslim communalism and Muslim separatism which actually broke up India, according to Indian historians. But it is Muslim, what's called nationhood, which was inherent in Indian history, which ultimately found its what's called manifestation in Pakistan. So that is the statement made by a large number of Pakistani historians, and they say that as far as Hindus and Muslims were concerned, they were two independent nations in Indian history. There had never been an attempt to integrate these two groups religiously or politically. They moved in a parallel way from the very beginning itself, and the Muslims maintained their separate identity, the identity of their culture, the identity of their polity, and even ideology also. And when the British actually came to India, well, the Muslim nationalism or nationhood started assuming its fuller shape, and ultimately it actually got manifested in the form of a nation. So Muhammad Ali Jinnah represented the realization of Muslim nationalism, and therefore if you say that Jinnah stood for Indian unity, it was wrong according to some historians. So Ayesha Jalal actually says that there are plenty of reasons to say that Jinnah was not interested in Pakistan, because, and I will briefly talk about this, because the historiography written from 1947 up to the 80s, and even after the 80s also, some books actually came out, for example, Anita Inder Singh's book, and they all say that it was Jinnah. It's Jinnah's intransigence or obduracy or contumacy or his stubbornness actually made Pakistan possible. With a single-minded devotion, he actually, created Pakistan. This is one of the, most of the historians actually say like that. Now, Ayesha Jalal says that it was wrong to say that. In fact, Jinnah was not interested in Pakistan because he knew the problems that would have to be faced by the government of independent Pakistan. What is that? So as far as Ayesha Jalal is concerned, she says that after 1937, everybody knows that Jinnah became the sole spokesman of the Muslim community in India. He assumed the leadership of the Indian Muslim League. Up to 1937, Jinnah's position in India and also as the leader of Indian national movement was very shaky. And in the year 1920, of course, he criticized Mahatma Gandhi. He criticized Mahatma Gandhi because he thought that Mahatma Gandhi is mixing politics with religion when he actually took up the cause of Khilafat. Jinnah, as a nationalist, said that religion and politics should be kept separate. And the same Jinnah in the year 1916 played a very important role in bringing Indian National Congress and Muslim League together at Lucknow and both the parties actually signed a pact called Lucknow Pact, and they agreed to place before the British a common set of demands to, to achieve major political reforms from the British. And the same Jinnah, in fact, in the 1920s, played a major role in preparing, some reports and all to gain more political freedom or reforms from the British. But after 1930, well, Jinnah's influence began to wane. In the 1930, in the 1931-32 roundtable conferences, he was actually neglected. And in the year 1935, as all of us know, the British actually gave an act called 1935 India Act. Up to that period, Jinnah more or less remained as an insignificant figure, and therefore he went back to England and remained there for some time. But in the year 1935, when the India Act was passed and the British actually held elections for various provinces, well, Jinnah came to India and participated in the electoral process. And he tried to establish contact with the Kangas party. He tried to have joint electoral propagandas with the Kangas. What happened was that in the year 1937, about 8 provinces were won by Congress, and the Muslim League could not win even one province out of 11 provinces. And even in Muslim majority provinces also, the Jinnah's party could not get even largest number of seats. So Congress actually emerged as the biggest victor, and this actually disappointed Jinnah. But it is said that, according to some people, why did actually Jinnah become a stubborn leader after 1937? Stubborn in the sense, why did he become utterly anti-Congress, anti-Nehru, anti-Gandhi, and he carried on from propaganda against the administration of Congress, saying that the Muslim minorities are being victimized in Congress-ruled states. So many people say that the 1937 elections were a watershed in the history of Muslim League as well as Jinnah's personal life. And Jinnah completely underwent a change. So some historians say that it actually led to the Islamization of Jinnah's personality, his ideology, his policy, etc., etc. And he was very angry with the Congress as well as with Jawaharlal Nehru, because in the UP province, that is to say United Province, the present day Uttar Pradesh, it is said that Jinnah's party gained some seats, but Congress emerged as the largest party, and Jinnah wanted to have a coalition government with Nehru in the UP province, that is to United Province. But though Mahatma Gandhiji was interested, well, Jawaharlal Nehru was not interested. Even Patel was also not interested, and they simply ignored Jinnah, and they formed the government. And thus, it when Jinnah was neglected or ignored by the Congress party, well, he felt slighted, and from that day onwards, Jinnah started using religious symbols, and he began to use religion as the basis for the mobilization of Muslim community in India. So, for many historians, the year 1937 and also the rejection of Jinnah by the Congress party in forming a government in United Province, brought about a transformation in Jinnah's policies and all. So up to that period, Jinnah was Jinnah posed himself to be a constitutionalist, posed himself to be a nationalist, but after that period, he underwent a change. He became a secessionist, he became a communalist, and he became what's called a separatist. So whether this kind of statement is correct, so Ayesha Jalal says that this is wrong to say like that. And as we know, from that day onwards, orthodox historiography or the traditional historiography dominated by Indian scholars who say that from that day onwards, Jinnah pursued a policy of anti-Hindu, anti-Congress, anti-Nehru policies, and he tried to mobilize the people not on the basis of any political programs, but on the basis of religion, on the basis of religious symbols, on the basis of fear created against the Congress administration. And he created an impression that the Congress ruled states are oppressing the Muslim minorities in their states, and therefore Jinnah used all opportunities to create a fierce ecosystem among the Muslims and to mobilize them as a terminated in the year 1940 Lahore resolution. So, as all of us know, in the year 1949 and in the year 1940 at Lahore, the grouping of Muslim majorities, that is the Northwestern Frontier province,
Okay. all participants. Sir, Lokesh sir, sir, audible sir?
Now audible.
Yes sir, yes sir, yes. Now, please carry on sir. Please continue sir. Please continue sir.
I don't know what actually went wrong.
Due to the network problem sir, it is cloudy, so we are also facing same problem here sir.
Yeah. Okay, let me continue. So, well, I will not take much of your time hereafter.
No sir, no problem sir, no problem sir. It is very informative.
I'm taking up from where I stopped now. So, as far as 1940 Lahore resolution concerned, well, Muhammad Ali Jinnah made a statement that people of India, especially the Muslims, feel that they are a separate nation and they should be given a separate nation, and Muslim majority areas should be brought together and they should be given enough sovereign powers and status of independent state. And though he did not use the term Pakistan in that resolution, everybody called this Lahore resolution as the Pakistan resolution. Jinnah makes a statement about the grouping of Muslim majority areas. Northwestern Frontier Province on the one hand, Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, and here Assam and Bengal. So he wanted to have two, groupings, and these groupings are Muslim majority areas would enjoy lot of independence or autonomy and also sovereign states, but he never used the word Pakistan. And then after 1940, Muhammad Ali Jinnah criticized everybody, saying that though he did not use the term Pakistan in the Lahore resolution, everybody started saying that the Lahore resolution was the Pakistan resolution. Especially he criticizes the Hindu dominated newspapers and the Congress leaders as well as the British, and he says that the Congress is foisting the Pakistan demand on Muslims. Congress is fathering this Pakistan on Muslims, though he did not use the term Pakistan. But from 1941 onwards up to 1947, well, as all of us know, up to 1945 there was Second World War, and during the war period, Muhammad Ali Jinnah did not fight for Pakistan, but during that period, what he did was that he wanted to have good relationship with the British, and he went on, severing his relationship with the Congress, in the sense that he knew that the Congress party would not agree to devolve more power to Muslim majority areas. And in the year 1942, when the Cripps mission came to India, well, Cripps mission actually made a provision for the secession of states, or it actually gave scope for the creation of separate states, but Jinnah did not accept it. And then in the year 1946, the cabinet mission came to India. It actually gave scope for the grouping of the states, if not Pakistan, grouping of the states. Jinnah actually accepted that. So on the basis of all these facts, Aisha Jalal says that Muhammad Ali Jinnah never used the term Pakistan for a very, very long time up to 1946. He was only using the Pakistan demand as a threat, as a tactical move, as a bargaining counter, as a bargaining chip. He was not interested in getting Pakistan because he was using the Pakistan demand, against the Congress party or with the British to gain more concessions, political reforms for the Muslims. He wanted to have maximum number of seats at the Central Assembly, also maximum of seats in the provincial assemblies in the Muslim minority areas, and at the same time to have more autonomy and independence for Muslim majority areas. So he was not interested in that, Pakistan. And the Aisha Jalal also said that Muhammad Ali Jinnah very well knew that the creation of Pakistan would not be viable economically and also in terms of defense, because he thought that economically Pakistan would lose, very fertile provinces with India only, because when if Pakistan is divided, more than 6 million people would go to Pakistan, and more than 35 million people would remain in India itself. So all Muslims from India cannot be sent to Pakistani area, and therefore he thought that economically also it is not viable. So on the basis of these developments, Ayesha Jalal come to the conclusion that it was Patel, it was Nehru, it was the Kangas party, and also the British who actually made Jinnah to accept the Pakistan demand. Otherwise, he was interested in having Muslim majority areas as independent states, but those states would remain in a confederation or in a federal system in which both Muslim majority areas and Hindu majority areas remain together, and a centrally administered government would actually look after the administration. So Ayesha Jalal actually says that Pakistan was not the demand of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So this is called revisionist historiography. And whether this revisionist historiography is acceptable or not, but Ayesha Jalal argues very authoritatively on the basis of evidence, on the basis of the statements made by Nehru, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, on the basis of the colonial records, on the basis of what's called Jinnah's papers, that Jinnah stood for what's called United India, and it was Congress party, it was Nehru, it was Patel, which actually sent out Jinnah with his Pakistan. And even the records which were released by the British, as all of us know, British government actually brought out in 12 volumes all the records pertaining to the transfer of power from 1942 to 1947 in the form of what is called constitutional relations between Britain and India, the transfer of power 1942 to 1947. 12 volumes were released by the British by 1983, and all these records also indicate that the British were not, and the Jinnah was not interested in Pakistan. Now, another interesting development that we come across in historiography is that in the year 1958, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, our minister, who was a minister in the Nehru's cabinet, wrote a book called India Wins Freedom. And when he wrote that book, he made some controversial statements. And since he was one of the cabinet members of Nehru's government, well, what he did was that he removed 30 pages from that India Wins Freedom and sealed it and kept it in National Library, Calcutta, and also in National Archives in Delhi. And he also made a statement, or he also wrote a will that after 30 years, that is to say in 1988, these 30 pages should be what's called made public. So the book was published in the year 1958. And as you know, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad talks about his role in the freedom movement and also about partition. And he says that he stood against partition. But some people actually, stood for Pakistan within the Congress, and it has pained him. So in the year 1988, those 30 pages were published, and in that, those 30 pages, of course, he did not make any startling revelations, but in those 30 pages, Maulana Abdul Kalam blames both Nehru and Patel as being responsible for the partition of the country. And he also go to the extent of saying that I committed a great blunder in making Nehru the president of Congress party in 1946, because it was Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad who was the president of Congress party from 1940 to 1946. And in 1946, Nehru became president, and Azad says that he had a hand in the succession of Nehru as the president of Congress party, and it was a blunder of Himalayan proportion. He says that it was a blunder of Himalayan proportion. And he also says that, I cannot forgive myself for the mistake And I warned Nehru that if we agree for partition of the country, history will not forgive us, and history will definitely pass a judgment saying that it was Kangas party which divided India and not Muslim League. So this is the statement of Kalam, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, but he was more critical of Patel's role, whether Patel was really responsible for the partition of the country. And he said that it was Patel. Patel was convinced by Mountbatten, and he was first won over by Mountbatten for partition, and then with the help of Patel, he also won Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and then he actually, partitioned the country, and etc. etc. So these are some of the very interesting developments. But Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad in some places says that he very vehemently argued against partition in the meeting with Mountbatten. But Ram Manohar Lohia, in the year 1960 actually wrote a book called, a small pamphlet called Guilty Men of India's Freedom. And there Lohia says that Maulana Azad did not speak a word about against partition in the meeting. And to say, quote Lohia, Maulana Azad sat in a chair throughout the 2 days of this meeting in a corner of the very small room, which packed us all, puffed away his endless cigarettes, and spoke not a word. He may have been pained, but it is silly of him to try to make out as though you were the only one who opposed partition or who was opposed to partition. This is the opinion of Ram Manohar Lohia, who actually wrote this Guilty Men of India's Freedom in response to India Wins Freedom. Anyway, these are some of the interesting points that we come across. Of course, Jalal's views have not been accepted by many historians, because many people say that the history, if we look at the history of India's freedom movement and also Jinnah's politics, definitely one will conclude that it was Jinnah's intransigence or Jinnah's stubborn behavior actually led to the partition of the country. In the 1990s, a few works actually came out. And what is interesting to note is that, I will conclude shortly, what we note is that most of the historiography that actually came out after 1990 started focusing more on the human cost. So they started focusing less on high politics and apportioning the blame. He was responsible for the partition, or this gentleman was responsible for partition. That kind of attitude was given up, and they started focusing more on the experiences of the people. When the partition took place, there was exodus, there was forced migrations, there was kidnappings, there were exploitation of women, there was destruction, etc., etc. And people started focusing more on what's called human problems and also human cost or human dimensions. Why did people suffer like that? And why did the people who live together for such a long time all of a sudden become hostile and enemies and start fighting against each other? And could the partition have been effected in a less violent manner? So all these things, and a large number of works in the form of recording of or documentation of women experiences have come out. Urvashi Bhutalia's book, other side of the silence, and then Ritu Menon's book in the same way, Pepia Ghosh book, Kamala Bashin's book, and all these works have given lot of importance to what's called the human side, the human miseries that actually took place during the partition days, because hundreds of thousands of people were forced to leave their motherland when the border lines were drawn and India was all of a sudden divided. And these migrants became, these people who were citizens of India, all of a sudden they became what's called refugees in their own place, and they had to go back. They had to go to the other country on the basis of religion. So Indian Muslims were forced to go to Pakistan in a large number, and in the same way the Sikhs and the Hindus were forced to come to India in a large way, and this did not take place in a systematic and peaceful manner. It actually was accompanied with a lot of violence, and hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And why were people killed like this? Why did people actually fight like this? And human difficulties, human miseries, have been recorded by a large number of historians. So they focus more on now the difficulties suffered, experienced by the migrants, and also they focus on the refugee problems. And when we talk of human dimensions, most of the historians are feminist writers, and also people from subaltern school focus on women, because women became the symbol of honor there. For one community, women become a symbol of honor. For another community, the women of other community became the symbol of dishonor, and women were tortured, they were molested, they were raped, and hundreds of thousands of women were killed in the most brutal manner. Some of them were kept, kidnapped and kept by the kidnappers. And the problem of women did not end there, because when they felt, safe in the kidnapper's house, well, the government of India and Pakistan, appointed recovery commissions, and the recovery commissions actually identified these refugees, and once again they were actually brought back to their countries. And when Hindu women were brought back to India and Muslim women were taken back to Pakistan, well, their families refused to accept them. There also they suffered. So the women suffered throughout the what's called partition process, you can say. So this migration did not stop in 1947 August. It actually continued, and therefore some historians have written on the long process of partition. The partition did not end all of a sudden with the partition of the country, but it actually continued for a very, very long time. And now, as far as the partition historiography is concerned, we can definitely say that this historiography is evolving. This is actually growing from high politics and power politics. It is now focusing on human cost and human dimensions, and also, now people are speaking about the legacy of a partition. What kind of legacy partition has left behind? Whether India and Pakistan have managed to overcome the hangover of partition, etc., etc. But unfortunately, both the countries have not become free of partition pangs, in the sense that lot of mistrust is there, and Jammu and Kashmir problem is one of the major problems that actually affecting the diplomatic relations and cultural relations between these two countries, because both Pakistan is thinking that unless Kashmir is merged with Pakistan, well, its formation will not become complete. And so a kind of irredentism, what you say, irredentism, it is actually affecting Pakistan, and India, which has not accepted partition, because partition was done on the basis of religion, says that Kashmir is part and parcel of Indian Republic. It's an integral part of Indian Republic, and therefore it cannot be given over to any other country, and it could be retained by India only. So these two, this particular problem is affecting both the countries, and therefore both the countries have become nuclear powers, and this legacy of partition is still affecting our relationship, I must say. And as far as East Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan could not maintain or control East Pakistan, because the exploitative policies followed by West Pakistan, that is the imposition of Urdu or domination of Punjabi elements in army, in civil service, in bureaucracy, etc., has affected the people of West Pakistan, East Pakistan, and therefore the East Pakistan is rebelled against West Pakistan and formed an independent country called Bangladesh. And it clearly proved that religion cannot be the basis of a nationhood. and it has clearly shown that religion cannot be a binding force which would keep the people together. So we can definitely say that the views of the historian are changing, and therefore it is very difficult to say who was responsible for the partition of the country, whether one person should be blamed or whether this party should be blamed, etc., etc. And at the same time, we cannot also wish away the fact that some people did contribute to the partition of the country. So partition historiography in this way is is undergoing transformation regularly. So before I conclude, I make a reference to one of the greatest intellectuals of 20th century, B.R. Ambedkar. Ambedkar was the first person to write about partition, and many historiographers or many historians have neglected the contribution made by B.R. Ambedkar. Back in 1940 itself, immediately after the Lahore resolution was passed, or Pakistan resolution was passed in the year 1940 March, well, Ambedkar took upon himself the responsibility of preparing a draft on Pakistan resolution. And within 6 months, he produced a very insightful volume with a lot of information under the caption Thoughts on Pakistan. Thoughts on Pakistan. And in that book, Thoughts on Pakistan, Ambedkar actually focused on the demands on the Muslim League, whether Muslim League's demands were justified, whether Congress should accept the demand for partition, whether Congress should oppose the demand, and if at all Muslim League demands Pakistan, why should it be given? And here we very clearly support the creation of Pakistan, because Muhammad Ali Jinnah thinks that these two communities, because of various contradictions that they have in their religion, in their cultural setup, etc., etc., and also in the ideological moorings of Jinnah and Kangas party, both the communities cannot remain together, and it is better for Kangas people to get rid of Muslim League by giving it its Pakistan. So he was the first person who wrote, and he actually says that even economically India would not lose anything if Pakistan is created. In fact, India would gain economically. Defense, in terms of defense also, he says that if northwestern frontier and the other regions remain in India, Indian government will have to defend these regions and protect the entire country. And if Pakistan is created, well, India will be freed of that responsibility, and it will be Pakistan's burden. So, on the basis of economies, on the basis of the defense of India, on the basis of peace inside the country, well, Ambedkar, in fact, supports the creation of Pakistan. This is the only area where he actually supports the Congress Congress stand, and ask Congress party to give up Jinnah is Pakistan. Well, Jinnah was not happy with the Pakistan, because though he went on demanding the full Punjab area and also Bengal area, well, the British actually partitioned these two areas on the basis of Hindu and Muslim majority areas, and gave Muslim majority areas to Pakistan. And that's why Jinnah, when this kind of Pakistan was given to him, he said that he was given a truncated Pakistan, a moth-eaten Pakistan, and this was not the Pakistan that he expected. So anyway, what we see is that Ambedkar's statement, in fact, influenced the policies of the British government, you must say, because his logical arguments, in fact, were approved both by Jinnah as well as the Congress party, because B.R. Ambedkar himself says in the preface for the second edition, which actually came out in the year 1945 under the caption Pakistan or the partition of India, that both the parties are quoting my statements without acknowledging my contributions. So anyway, it's a very interesting problem, partition historiography. My only request to the teachers who are listening to me is that you include a topic on partition in your syllabus, because it is related to our country. And in southern Indian states, in many universities, we did not find this topic in the syllabi, because people think that the partition actually affected North India only, not South India. But anyway, this is one of the major factors which is actually affecting our republic in the form of Indo-Pakistan relations, and therefore everybody should know what is partition, why did the partition take place, whether partition has been accepted by the people, and in what way the effects of partition should be nullified or lessened, and in what way these two countries should come together and live in the same way as they used to live before 1947. So with these remarks, I conclude my lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, actually, till now, we know only the real historiography of India's partition. But today, after your words, we come to know the real historiography of India's partition, sir. Till now, we know only the real historiography of India's partition, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are all impressed by your real historiography of India's partition, sir. I am very grateful to you, sir, on behalf of all the participants, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now I request Professor G.N. Basurajappa, sir, HOD of Canada, and the convener of this program to convey the vote of thanks. Basurajappa, sir, please, sir.
Dear friends, first of all, I would like to pay my devotional pranams to our Swamiji, Dr. Shumurthy Muruga Sharanru, who has blessed us to make this webinar success. My sincere thanks to Sri A.J. Paramasvaya, Secretary of our SAM Vidyapita, and CEO Sri M.G. Dhareswamy sir also. I am very much grateful to today's resource person, Professor Lokesh K.M., Department of Studies in History, Mangalore University, Mangalore, for his knowledgeable talks on evolving historiography of India's partition. Thank you, sir. On behalf of our college and participants, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I am very much grateful to our principal, Dr. K.C. Ramesh, sir, IQAC coordinator, Dr. Harvey Hegdal, sir, and teaching and non-teaching staff of the college. My respectful thanks to all teachers from home state and outside the state like Kolkata, Jammu, Tamil Nadu, Varanasi, Goa, Gujarat, Patiala, who have joined us this webinar and made it very successful. Friends, on 3rd August, Dr. G.R. Jagadish, Principal, C. Bhimsen Rao National College of Law, Shumogga, addressed the webinar on the Constitution of India, Aspirations and Challenges. We will join at 11 a.m. on Monday, that is 3rd August. Once again, thank you, one and all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, we will leave the meeting, sir.